Picture yourself in the late 1800s. You've been outcast by German society, you've been laughed at by academics, and spurned by potential lovers. You're now miserable, broke, and ill, but still very, very thinky. You are, in fact, working on another book, and even though you don't know it yet, in that book you will write 3 words that will change the course of history. Gott ist tot. And if you only saw that written down, you might think that it's announcing God as a guy called Todd. But no, you are Friedrich Nietzsche, and you are saying God is dead. And suddenly, all hell breaks loose. And you have syphilis. I'm Jordan Rain, and in this episode of The Loneliness Industry, we're looking at what happens when massive authority figures are murdered by philosophers with sexually transmitted diseases. We'll look at what happens when an entire culture loses its primary source of meaning and is left staring into the void, realizing the world might be exactly as merciless, unjust, and pointless as it feels. Because here's the thing. When there's a gaping hole in our systems of meaning, something will rush in to fill it. And Western capitalism, with its genius for repackaging anything that might threaten it, didn't just fill that void. It found a way to sell it back to us. In the aftermath of Nietzsche's great meaninglessness bomb, capitalism dressed up its own values, individualism, control, and self-obsession, in the garb of a new messiah, one that promised transcendence, but delivered an even deeper kind of disconnection. This episode isn't about whether God exists or not. It's about what came after. It is about the commodification of enlightenment, the way capitalism sells us spiritual-seeming coping mechanisms to deal with the pain and emptiness it created, all while quietly locking us tighter into the same cycles. So today is about capitalism's body double, wearing guru robes. Because when I say Western spiritualism, I don't mean ancient mysticism or genuine community ritual. I mean the Instagramified, retreat in Bali, law of attraction flavoured belief system that tells you the universe is your vision board and that you can and should control everything with your vibes. And what's really under all that? Narcissism. A solipsistic, grandiose vision of the self. The idea that you are the god of your own reality and everyone and everything else is either a prop or a reflection of you. This episode argues something that will sound uncomfortable at first. That Western spiritualism is not a balm for our disconnected world. It is one of the reasons we're more disconnected than ever. Because it doesn't just repackage capitalism's toxic values. It amplifies them. It sells us grandiosity as healing. It tells us that we and our thoughts are both the cause and the cure to all of our suffering. It rewires empathy so completely that we start to see other people's pain as their fault too. And if you're still here after that intro, welcome. This is The Loneliness Industry, a podcast where we dig into the root causes of disconnection, the quiet ways societal values keep us lonely. In earlier episodes, we've broken down capitalism's core values: individualism, control, competition, the hero narrative, cognitive primacy, and more. Then we dug into how the tactics used to teach those values mirror covert narcissism, and how fully internalizing those values turns the culture itself narcissistic. Today, we're zooming in on capitalism's most seductive disguise yet, Western spiritualism. We'll trace its birth in the Nietzschean void, where capitalism saw a market. We'll see how the longing for meaning and connection became the perfect crucible for toxic values to morph into gurus. And we'll see how spiritualism became the crystal-dangling promise that you, yes you, can control the universe with your thoughts. Along the way, you'll meet Nietzsche, Hegel, a controversial narcissist, and a purple turkey who earns millions from harming her clients on stage. This is the story of how a culture steeped in narcissism found a way to sell narcissism itself and call it enlightenment. Now, this all begins when Nietzsche left off, with a vacuum. And no, not the sucky kind, that the story totally comes to suck by the end. By vacuum, I mean the void, the yawning gap that opens up when you take away the thing that once made sense of your world. To understand the rise of Western spiritualism, and how it's shaped by the narcissistic system that is Western capitalism, we have to start with said void, the God-shaped hole left over after Nietzsche's infamous 3 words, "God is taught." Now, Nietzsche's God is dead theory, first outlined in The Gay Science and later expanded on in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, wasn't about a literal deity actually genuinely carking it, so not along the lines of any giant bearded dude in the sky suddenly rupturing his spleen. No. Nietzsche was talking about a cultural and philosophical shift. Nietzsche argued that traditional religious belief, especially belief in the Christian God, had lost its power to shape morality and meaning in modern society. Even as far back as the late 1800s, he saw it coming. As science, reason, and secular values rose, belief in a divine moral order collapsed. And this triggered what you might call a crisis, or an opportunity, depending on how much you like Newspeak. With no more absolute truths, no more high authority, and no more comforting explanations for loss and death, individuals faced nihilism, the sense that life has no purpose. And the fact is that most people find nihilism pretty fucking unbearable. But Nietzsche did not just opt for like some cool guy shrug and say, "Yeah, it sucks to be you now, done it, every man." Instead, he issued a challenge: confront the void. Take responsibility for creating new values and meaning through your own strength and creativity. Which sounds pretty cool on the surface, right? But as if Nietzsche's afterlife wasn't full enough of horrible ironies, behold, with this challenge to create your meaning personally, this broke 19th century German philosopher essentially wrote ad copy for marketers 100 years into the future. Because empowering as it sounds, Nietzsche's idea already had individualism at its core. Not to mention ye not oldie hero narrative, particularly considering that he later ties the project of the self-created meaning to das Übermensch. And yeah, we already know who laps up Übermensch talk like free champagne, aside from grandiose narcissists, I mean. But back to holes. Big, gaping holes where meaning used to lie. Sometimes. And among other things. Because I should start by pointing out that the shape of the hole God left behind was not the same for everyone. From our own temporal standpoint, the death of God might seem like no big deal. Or even a good thing if you had the fire and brimstone type God in your upbringing or on your mind. But even for those who experienced a pretty ruthless, punitive God, that God still played a role in providing meaning and even, perversely, connection. So I'm going to illustrate that with an example, right? Picture the following setting. A world that is pretty unjust. This is not going to be an imagination-intensive exercise. Picture a world that is pretty unjust, where there are wars all over the place and the constant risk of losing your job or livelihood. Picture po-faced people wandering around saying shitty things and occasionally murdering each other. You've got diseases, vomit, stinking factories, and no one has found the time to invent electric guitars yet. Imagine all of that. And within that shitty context, you had a parent who you saw as unconditionally loving. A parent who offered comforting words and showed you the meaning in things when stuff got really bad. They always listened and comforted you when you were sad or alone. Now I'm guessing that having that listening ear and a meaning maker mitigates the foulness of the setting. And it might even be enough to make you feel warm and hopeful about the future, which genuinely does have electric guitars in it. So it's hopefully no surprise that if that kind of parent was suddenly gone, it's pretty awful. Now that parent is obviously a God analogue, and I really feel for anyone who faced the loss of a God like that. I know that there is some people's experience of God, and if you had that loving God figure debunked, the void left behind is monumental. But that is not the only experience of God that there is. I often hear instead about a God that was narrated to mirroring a dictatorish, over-punishing, terrifying being. That God was painted as constantly watching you, even when you went to the toilet, waiting for you to do something wrong or think something wrong, because that God knew. That's terrifying. So let's imagine you're still within this crappy world that we described before, unjust, grotty, with shitty people in it, and this God is spying on you constantly, might punish you at any moment. In fact, this God only approves of you if you follow a specific list of behaviours, and even some additional ones that God's middlemen have made up. This God might even just torture you or make your life miserable for no reason whatsoever, like what happened to Lot. This kind of God mirrors a grandiose, narcissistic parent. Now, what happens when you lose that kind of parent? Well, sadly, I can tell you from personal experience, on the parental level, not the God level, but it still might surprise you. It leaves a hole anyway. It leaves you wishing you had a parent or God or meaning-making figure who is unconditionally loving, protecting, and comforting. Because without that, you just feel alone, unprotected, unseen, and fucking petrified all of the time. You kind of long for what you never had and what others sometimes seem to. Now, the point is that even if the God you lost was a terrifying prick, there is still a longing, still a yearning that springs from a lack. So no matter what your experience of God, the absence of some final say meaning maker can still leave a void. Now, a lot of us weren't brought up religious at all, and we don't equate the longing that we feel with the lack of God. And really, the longing for meaning, connection, purpose, and so on, it can be seen as inherently human or existential. So regardless of whether we call it the God-shaped hole or not, the longing remains. And it's pretty hard to budge. So, if you do have issues with calling the hole God-shaped, do feel free to replace it with something like the something is missing but I don't know what the fuck it is hole, if you have an incredibly good memory and wish to ignore one of Nietzsche's most important ideas. Because back then, when Nietzsche was kicking around with his syphilis and his love of Wagner, God was the intended quick fix for those very human needs. God may even still work for some of you, and I'm not knocking that or judging that experience. In fact, I'd be stoked if it worked for me, so I get it. The aim here, though, is to outline the setup, the void that most of us now live with. The one Nietzsche suggests comes from the increasing influence of capitalism on morality and value, and the shrinking influence of a once powerful religion. So the take-home is this. In the wreckage where meaning collapsed, capitalism found a gold mine. Because where there's a desperate longing, there is also a market. Our ache, our need for meaning, protection, connection, or even just for that which we cannot name, is real. But along with being, for many of us, inarticulable, it is also a deeply vulnerable position. A vulnerable position that ain't easy to resolve on its own. And that makes it really easy to sell shit to. But wait, you might say, why manifesting, lesson extraction, and crystals in our orifices? Why not fill the void with something else? We did kind of try and do that with other things. This is capitalism, after all, so whatever your heart's desire, we produce that now. And that is really what our system offers, or professes to, that we can purchase our way out of anything. We aren't prevented from trying to fill the void. It's just that we've been trained to try and fill it with stuff. Computer games, cars, food, bungee jumping, collecting Star Wars figures or guitars or STDs. Faceless lovers, they do cost money for your STD collection. In any case, you, dear listener, have doubtless noticed, as have many of us, none of that stuff quite satisfies the particular ache we discussed, at least not for long. Our system has failed us in terms of creating real meaning, real connection, and real safety. That is what keeps the system ticking over, our not attaining these things. In that sense, the God-shaped hole is almost ideal. It eggs us on to desperately try and fill it. Now, I say almost ideal for a reason. There is now a problem. The failure of stuff to fill the void has become flaming obvious. Like, we figured it out, you figured it out. The idea is that we all have that longing and a belief that some purchasable item might actually satisfy it. Then, pointless consumption can continue indefinitely, and pointless consumption is what makes the Western world go round. Now, this is the secret. that marketers know. What drives the market isn't simple dissatisfaction. It's a special sort of dissatisfaction. A dissatisfaction that believes it can be satisfied, even though it actually won't be. In other words, the market is sustained if and only if the solution it sells does not work, but looks like it would. However, the God-shaped hole has proved too big for that. Most of us long for something more. Most of us know stuff is not going to cut it. Here we all are then, kicking around in a state of longing that won't be cured. And previously, a lot of generations white-knuckled it through. But by now, we're pretty miffed as to what might work in terms of being happy. Importantly, a certain amount of gaslighting has gone on as well, and we're going to get to the importance of that later. In the meantime, we've been told time and time again that we should be happy and really don't have anything to complain about because look at all the stuff around, go buy stuff. All this means is that the void persists, and now we feel like failures for not being happy, and like we can't admit that we're not happy because we'll just sound like spoiled brats or something. It's like we're still longing for something we can't name, we cannot discuss, and feel totally out of options in terms of where to look. At this point, only one of two things can happen in a system that has failed to meet our existential needs. Now, option one is a mass consumer revolt. And by that I mean tearing up the failed system, scrapping all the life-sucking, community-destroying, planet-raping values it consists of. Unfortunately, this requires an almost total global overhaul, and probably a lot of death. And let's not forget that death is now a shitload harder to cope with, now that no one believes in the afterlife anymore. And also, what values are we going to put there instead after cleaning up the corpses? So obviously this option is unpopular. Option two is amping our existing values up instead of cutting them down, which is obviously not a bumpy ride because everyone's already internalized those values to some extent already. It's also less likely to involve any killing. In fact, it's just shunting us along to the logical conclusion of the values that we already hold dear. We're like boosting them in volume to hope that it will drown out all of this awful doubt and the constant howling of the void. It's going with what we have. And what we have is everyone striving for control over their lives out of fear, but they name it self-improvement. This is a good start. Control in the name of self-improvement. Check. Next, we have individualism and the hero narrative that supports it. And, people certainly like that, as the success of blockbuster hero films and general selfishness make clear. So here's the sales pitch within the frame of option two. Let's make the individual more than just a hero. Let's make their drive for control, for self-perfection, so all-important that their failure to do it is a reflection of their moral corruption. Their success at it becomes the ultimate key to happiness and the sign that they're a superior person. Their thoughts and their minds, remember the episode on cognitive primacy, their thoughts and their minds are that which produces outcomes. Awesome. That's going to put an end to all the feelings and shit, because, rationality is what should win out in the end. And no, this isn't solipsism. I'm not imagining that everyone and everything in this world is a reflection of my thoughts. I mean, I am, but I'm not going to call it solipsism. I'm going to call it manifesting. Finally, check it out. All the bad things that happen are to teach you something. The death of your child, a hideous car accident, a massive fistula, it's all for you to learn something. The universe is literally bent on your betterment. If you can learn to accept, forgive, not cry, and just keep thinking of lollipops and rainbows. In fact, if you do think of those lollipops and rainbows hard enough, they will manifest into your living room. You become God. And you can do a sideline in spiritual books to boot. This is literally the product we've all been waiting for since Nietzsche ruptured God's spleen. This is a solution that we can believe might fill us up, because it's all about us. I mean, I know I'm slagging this off, but hands up if it genuinely has no appeal whatsoever. because obviously it does have some appeal to most people. This is tickets to you as the biggest new show in town. You on the hero's journey to your own enlightenment. And you must learn, like a god in training, that control is the be-all and end-all. That control is centered in your mind. And until you swallow, and I mean master, the cognitive control ideal, until you merge with the universe that is all you anyway and all connected, said universe will ensure that each thing that occurs is a lesson specifically for you. The universe, in other words, will be in your service, reminding you to behave like the god you are and to under no circumstances think the wrong things. Code for under no circumstances, be yourself, right? Be a god. And we are familiar by now with all of these ideals. We've been trained to find them appealing. And it boils down to this. By amping up capitalism's existing, and according to Christopher Lasch, narcissistic values, we are being sold the God seat in our own lives. We're being sold meaning in everything that occurs to us personally, as if the whole universe's aim is teaching me, specific, perfectly designed lessons for my own progress. We're being sold grandiosity as a solution to our feelings of inadequacy. We're being sold self-importance as an antidote to doubting the system and ourselves. And in the end, it is not hard to pitch such faux solutions to we who have already been trained for self-obsession. It is really a repeat of the only hook any advertiser ever needs in this day and age. It really is all about you. Now, if you're still here and still listening, you have my respect. You're obviously brave enough to be facing the societal shadow in us all. And that means either you didn't totally fall for this, or you tried it and felt that something was off. Or if you're still flailing, know that it is a very clever mental trap that this whole thing hinges on. The idea that your own doubt and so-called negative thoughts are a sign that you need to keep at it. Yeah, and the parallels to doubt in Christianity are clear. And to doubt in the keto diet. Remember that one? Their mantra was also, if it's not working, you aren't doing it hard enough. Keto harder. Believe harder. Marketers have learned, potentially from priests, that using people's doubt as confirmation is the ultimate way to keep them trapped. And you might also be here because, like me, you know people who persist with this stuff. The kind of people that call you negative for speaking out against it. The kind of people who blame you for the fact that bad things have happened to you because you invited it. This hallmark excuse for erasing empathy is a big, big clue in terms of who the stuff works best on. And this is where Western spiritualism really does diverge from any form of Christianity. It has no fucking sympathy. No empathy at all. Empathy has been swapped out for platitudes that make the sayer feel fine about not giving a fuck. Hey, dear friend, if bad stuff happens to you, it's a lesson. I'm not going to listen to you moan. It's a lesson. The subtext is, shut up about it. Learn. Your failure to see the lesson in your cancer diagnosis or the death of your child or your dog is you being lesser and unenlightened. And this is all designed perfectly to stop complaint, rebellion, and connection. To stop you from feeling that you even have the right to a caring or listening ear. And saying, there's a lesson in everything, or you invited this into your life for a reason, I get to feel wise and walk away. I get to feel smug about being a shit friend. And in fact, I can narrate it as me being a good friend because I said some nice platitudes, when I've done none of the things that good friendship even requires. And this takes us into why the whole thing took off at all and remains flying. The final ingredient in the crucible that pressure cooked us into crystal healing. The reason a new guru is born every minute in a flurry of book releases, workshops, and retreats. It's all about power. Just like our former gods, our former systems, and the system we live under now, we circle back to power. Now, in episode 8, we covered in depth how Western capitalist culture raises us like a narcissistic parent would, under covert power. But before we go there, I want to talk about Poland for a moment, because Poland is a good way to see the contrast. Now, I once lived in Torun in Poland. I loved it. And I had a friend who was Catholic. Now, she was a rebel from her teens onwards, the sort that would, smoke behind the school, read banned books, and argue with teachers. But she always went to church. And it totally confused me. I said to her, how does being a rebel fit with going to church? And she told me that in Poland, under martial law, the Russians knew that where people gathered, they bonded, and that bonding is dangerous. That led to dissent. So she and her friends went to church anyway. They weren't filling the God-shaped hole with God per se, but with connection and defiance and protecting what they held dear, all in the face of a power that wanted them atomized. And that story blew my mind, because I had always had a totally bleak view of religion, and I would never have guessed that religion could function as protest, a way to form community when the powers that be know that gathering might be what actually topples them. Now, under Western capitalism, we don't live under overt military power, obviously. There are no tanks on the streets here. No obvious bans on gathering. But we're atomized anyway, by methods that are much quieter. Instead of soldiers, we get slogans. Instead of martial law, we get mindset culture. Instead of an open ban on connection, we get a set of values that teaches us connection is suspect, needy or codependent or clingy or weak. The lone wolf is held up as admirable rather than doomed to die, and the connected are to be pitied. The self comes first and foremost. And before that self is perfect, we're told we don't even have the right to look for connection or answers. That is covert power, and it isn't grandiose. There are no parades or force, no crackdowns, no big announcements, just quiet psychological tricks that get us to self-monitor, to self-doubt, and police our own thoughts so thoroughly that we barely notice we're on a leash. And here's the important part. Living under this covert power doesn't just shape what we do, it shapes what we feel like. This is the clincher. Even if you never become a covert narcissist, this system puts you in a very similar psychological position. Low self-esteem, high self-surveillance, and always wondering if you're doing it wrong. And that makes us all, whether we like it or not, ripe for what comes next. Because when you spend your whole life feeling vulnerable, you start to long for a little strength, a little influence, at least over your own life. And if, on top of that, you have an inkling that you might be someone of worth, you want someone to see it, to confirm it. And that too becomes part of your longing. And it's normal. That's part of healing from a system that's been quietly annihilating your sense of worth from birth. And for some people, who will become relevant very shortly, actual covert narcissists, that longing carries something sharper underneath. Rage. Rage that no one automatically sees how superior they are. Rage that admiration has to be coached or fished for instead of actually being freely given. Now, I grew up with this dynamic. Bertha, the woman that gave birth to me, was a covert narcissist. And her poor me performance and always had this seething hatred beneath it, like hatred for me personally, but also for the fact that no one in that tiny rural town in New Zealand would worship her. My father, on the other hand, was overt, grandiose. He didn't hint or plead for worship, he ordered it. And Bertha found this tacky, kind of rightly so. She thought that openly forcing people to worship you was cheating, and she hated him for it. So what she'd do is she'd take him down in subtle, clever ways just to annihilate his self-esteem. And when he fell, he became just like her, like poor me-ish and manipulatively fishing for compliments and fealty. And it was really weird to see him like that, like wheedling for us to rally around him and guess his needs in order to meet them, like she would. But he would eventually just spring back into I am God mode, just equally annoying. I never understood this. Now, Sam Vaknin, of all people, helped me too. Vaknin is really controversial, to put it mildly. But when it came to covert and overt narcissistic patterns, one of his ideas made unnerving sense. Now, Vaknin says two things. One, all narcissists have a void in them that can't be filled. Two, all covert narcissists long to be overt. Now, in his view, a covert narcissist, the vulnerable narcissist, is just a collapsed overt, i.e. grandiose one. So you've got the vulnerable one as a collapsed, grandiose one. This collapsed one is bitter, powerless, and defeated, like my father after one of Bertha's takedowns. The covert narcissist knows they can't inspire free worship. They're too pathetic, and they hate that, because for them, life is a competition. They're jealous of anyone who gets more anything than they do. And if at all possible, they'll try and claw their way back into that overt, grandiose position to escape what is, for a narcissist, the lowest of the low in terms of positions. And here's where it clicks back to society. Our covert narcissistic culture raises us in that same defeated yet special posture. And even if we aren't covert narcissists, some of the stuff rubs off because of the narcissistic nature of society itself. So we end up with that strange combination of feeling worthless and secretly hoping we're special. We also all have some of that longing for meaning, connection, and belonging already. That longing to fill the God-shaped hole. Now, on that count, I would argue against Vaknin and say that, the inner void is not specific to narcissists. It might be more insatiable to them, but given what we've said so far, it's something that anyone can experience. And that adds to the idea that we are often in the same psychological position that covert narcissists occupy. Meaning, you don't have to be a covert narcissist to occupy what is essentially the underdog position in a society that pushes narcissistic values. If you're not a covert narcissist, you're probably just unprepared to gaslight, manipulate, and harm people to escape. So, along with all that self-doubt and hope for specialness and longing for something more, most of us know, on some level, we don't have that much power. The death of God and our covertly narcissistic society work hand in hand to ensure we feel defeated. Yet we hope that somehow we will one day get to shine, and hopefully for most of us, without the need to walk on the corpses of others.
You do it like this.
Well, hello there, wandering spiritual teacher balancing a stack of books and a story about how you overcame your disempowerment by a cult. Really? You're telling me I am special? So special that the entire universe has been orchestrating every stubbed toe, every dead goldfish, every parking ticket, just to teach me personally something profound? And my thoughts are so mighty that reality itself rearranges around them, and all I need is your new best-selling book? Oh, and you'll throw in a workbook, a course, a weekend retreat in a yurt? Wow. You say I have purpose, and you can help me uncover that I was born for a reason, a grand design. Here I was thinking that existence was pointless, unfair, and shallow. I'll take 5. I'm so relieved. I'm healed. I'm enlightened, and I'm already picturing how cool it's going to be more enlightened than Karen in sales. Your fine offer looks like exactly what is going to stop me from feeling disempowered, non-special, and victimized. I might even be important. This is the rescue remedy for a system that's been failing us all along. A system that made us feel like everyone else is the hero and we are just, at best, an unsung one, and at worst, a meaningless cog in a machine. It's a rescue from having to admit that the world might be pointless, that life might be meaningless, because, as one person once commented under one of my YouTube videos, nihilism is untenable. Psychologically speaking, for most people, it is. And that is exactly why the God-shaped hole, the void, screams out for more. And Western spiritualism, which is really just Western capitalism and yoga pants, answers the call. It pulls us right out of our miserable, defeated position. It catapults us back into grandiosity, filling the God-shaped hole with me, me, me. Now, if you're too suspicious of Vaknin, I get it. So we're going to put a Hegelian lens on this instead, and just so you'll see how we land in a similar place. So 200 years ago, Hegel laid out what has come to be called the master-slave dialectic. It remains celebrated today as a way to understand power dynamics. So we still need to recall episode 8 here, where we showed that society actually raises us like a narcissistic parent would. That parallel was all about power too. Covert, hidden power. That means you self-monitor to act in the way that a covert narcissistic parent or societal parent desires. Now Hegel would explain this as one person having become the master, the covert narcissistic parent, that is society, via making another person their slave. And that slave is you or me. The interesting thing that Hegel points out is that the master's power depends on the slave. The slave is actually the one who keeps things going. And this is because without the slave, the master has no power. Power is always power over someone or something. Now, nowhere is this more clear than when narcissistic people, or entities, are in power. Like, narcissistic people are totally reliant on the slave to uphold their self-image and their positive ideas about themselves. Without their slave or slaves, they literally collapse, unless they can quickly find new ones, which is what they usually do. But any flavour of narcissist needs constant mirroring from a slave or slaves. And this is the concept of supply. Narcissistic people use control and manipulation to establish power in order to have their needs met, to get supply. The slaves, therefore, in a very clear sense, keep the narcissist running and functioning. If those slaves stop being slaves, the whole dynamic collapses. But what does this mean for us? Well, given that we are brought up in a covert narcissistic society, we are pushed into the slave position, isolated, forced into prescribed ways of being and self-regulation to conform to the values of the masters. And of course, we long for something more, because all of that just feels very lacking in meaning and slave-like. So we want autonomy and control. Those are also things that the master has taught us to value. Our societal narcissistic parent has taught us to value. So we assume those things are what will put us into a power position and enable us to make meaning and sense of our lives. Western spiritualism promises us exactly those things because it is a product of the same system. It is the same system, packaged for sale in guru garb. It promises control over outcomes using everyday objects that you can find at home, your mind, your thoughts. It promises you are the center of the world and that you are special. It promises you as your own God, your own master, the great creator of your destiny, purpose, and meaning. But Hegel has a warning too. Becoming a master only keeps the cycle running. And what better example of this than the so-called enlightened person who becomes a self-help guru? And you know the ones. Their calming voice is proof that they've eliminated all desire or, big emotions. Their minimalist room is evidence of some deeper purity. And they tell you they used to be just like you, burnt out, lonely, underpaid, beaten with a stick by their family. But now they've mastered their vibration, they've manifested abundance, and for just $49.99, they'll teach you how to do the same. They sell themselves as proof that the slave can become the master, and that you too can rise out of the void if you think right, act right, eliminate emotion, and align hard enough. But there's something pretty ugly underneath the pastel filters and mala beads. Enlightenment itself has become a system of oppression, a hierarchy where those who really are prepared to walk over the corpses of others will rise. And to show you how that works, meet one of its poster children. Now, I'm going to call her Purple Turkey. It's not her brand name, but she's actually a terrifying person, so a pseudonym is better. Purple Turkey looks like she's been airbrushed by a cloud and speaks so slowly you wonder if she's buffering. But behind the lavender lighting, her empire runs on a well-established narcissistic tactic. Tearing people down, then selling yourself as the only person who can build them back up again. Purple Turkey doesn't just offer peace. She sells the idea that she is above you, more evolved, cleaner, smarter, more enlightened. And the message is always the same. You are spiritually asleep, heavy, toxic, unevolved. She is spiritually awake, floating above, detached, unbothered, untouchable. And this is how enlightenment becomes a ranking, a badge of superiority, another competition, another capitalist game of who's ahead. And you're either in, levitating on your meditation cushion, or you're out, dragging your low vibrations through the mud. And here's where Hegel's master-slave dialectic becomes relevant. That above position, it can't stand up on its own. The masters only look like masters because we keep affirming them, buying the books, liking the live streams, hearting the serene photo of them holding a quartz egg in Bali. Without us, they're not ascended beings, they're just some woman in a wafty dress with a tragic backstory she's monetized. And this is also where Vaknin's narcissistic cycle comes in. He says, covert narcissists secretly long to become overt, but once they've manipulated their way to the top, they're still not safe in that position. Because being overt means depending on an audience that loves you and keeps affirming your superiority. And when that falls apart, boom, you're back to being a sad ass, using shadowy tactics to make the grosser pity you. And Purple Turkey is a perfect example of all of this. She preaches detachment, but she can't detach from us. She needs followers, attention, cash, and constant proof that she really is as enlightened as she says. And if that supply falters, if the book sales dry up or the live stream views tank, that master collapses, scrambling for relevance in an empty retreat hall where only the goats will bleat back at her. Which is why the performance of being above it all has to keep getting louder, shinier, more overt. The cracks in the tactics then begin to show, because the gurus are, in truth, slaves to the very system they've claimed to have transcended. And the thing is, most narcissistic people know this. They know their time and rule is potentially limited. They know that it won't necessarily last forever just based on their own merits. And this brings us to what's next. Their knowledge that they need a fail-safe. A double bind particular to master-slave relations in the world of marketing. And when we're done with this next section, you'll be able to spot it in both self-help and spiritual circles. And central to this fail-safe is a tactic that you'll remember from previous episodes. Now, remember how I said that marketing needs solutions that don't work but look like they should? Purple Turkey's career illustrates the first crucial trick that makes this possible, gaslighting. Here's how it plays out in the spiritual and self-help world. And this is the playbook that you need to keep in mind, whether you're watching Purple Turkey, a dating coach, a self-help healer, or a manifestation mentor, because this isn't just Purple Turkey's scam. It's the operating logic of multiple markets, be that spiritual, self-help, dating, or coaching. Number 1, target the vulnerable. So those with the maximum unnumbed longing. Lonely people longing for meaning are perfect. Number 2, tell them they're broken in ways they can't even see. As you know, we already know some of our flaws, but the real hook is this. Oh, honey, you don't even know how broken you are. I know you thought you'd done some work. That's really sweet. But I'm going to tell you, you're fucked. You're fucked in ways you don't even see. That's how fucked you are. Step 2 triggers the almost total self-doubt you need for the next stage, stage 3. Make yourself the only one who can see the brokenness. And this is the master-slave lock-in. This is where they say, I have the sight, you do not. You need me to see your flaws and you need me to fix them, making yourself indispensable, in other words. Now, item 4 is the double bind. It's extremely important. This is what everyone who's selling something that does not work absolutely fundamentally requires. It is their fail-safe in case you call bullshit. If you question the method, this is the double bind. If you question the method, you're not doing it right because the method is not flawed. You still are. And Purple Turkey is the bulletproof version of this. If you call her out for her cruelty, like she publicly humiliates people, if you call her out on her cruelty, or if those people themselves call her out on her cruelty, she'll say, you're just scared to face your shadow. You're not at a level yet where you're capable of facing your shadow. And the translation in every case is, your doubt proves that I am right. It's diabolically clever. And Purple Turkey manages to get away with the public and brutal humiliation of her clients via her particular form of this. If I hurt you, I'm healing you. And if you don't thank me for the pain, you're too unenlightened to see how enlightened I am. There's no way out. But here's the thing. It's not just her racket. What Purple Turkey does in her videos is just a distilled version of what Western spiritualism does as a whole, which is, not taking responsibility for their actions, damage, or totally useless product. And I'll reiterate the game plan. When you sell people something that doesn't work, eventually they'll notice. Eventually they'll get angry. When they do that, under no circumstances admit fault. And for God's sake, don't give them their money back. Blame them. Here we have another narcissistic tactic, blame shifting. It's not my fault or the failure of my product. The failure is in you. Darling, the method works. You're just not doing it right. Keto harder. This is how the Enlightenment world industrializes several of narcissism's oldest tools. Every failed manifestation, your thoughts were wrong. Every block in your life, your energy wasn't aligned. Every doubt, a sign you're not there yet. And it's not an error in the system, it is the system. Because if you still believe the method works and that you are the problem, you'll keep paying. You'll keep trying. You'll keep fixing the version of yourself that they've convinced you is broken. The version that is only ever almost there. This is a marketer's panacea. The solution you can believe in, even as it fails you again and again and again. You'll keep paying because they are prepared to keep damaging you into thinking it's your fault. Now, hands up if you're thinking these people are a pack of wankers. Problem is, it doesn't even end there. Beyond repackaging capitalist values, Western spiritualism magnifies one of the most damaging side effects of these values, the slow death of empathy. Now, sociologist Eva Illouz, who coined the term emotional capitalism, argues that our emotions aren't just personal anymore, they're instrumentalized. We care in order to sell, to market, to sell, or to self-develop, not in order to connect. And nowhere is this clearer than in the way Western spiritualism frames help. The language of empathy is everywhere. Love and light, healing vibes, soul alignment. But the practice of empathy, it quietly dies. And you can see this in the way that people like Ms. Turkey offer soothing words professing to care about assisting and healing until you buy their subscription and she tears you down in public. The thing is, when every pain is framed as something that you manifested, no one has to feel sorry for anyone anymore. We're exempt because a lesson is a lesson and crying is unwarranted. So if you're my friend and something terrible's happened to you, instead of offering you a listening ear, I can just rattle off a platitude and hand you a book link. And I'm not just talking about an abstract cultural trend here. I've actually seen this up close. Another story from my past, my strange past. I once worked here for a naturopath in a small town. Now, her name wasn't Yo-Yo, but it was really, really close to that. I shit you not. She'd done one of those week-long enlightenment workshop things where at the end you are declared enlightened and you get given a new name by some facilitator who's claimed to be a Tibetan monk. And Yo-Yo did that. And Yo-Yo was a terrible bully. She bullied a younger woman that worked with us that I'm going to call Anya. And she chipped away at her daily until months after I'd left, Anya had a nervous breakdown. But instead of facing what she had done, Yo-Yo spiritualized it. She told anyone who would listen that the young woman wasn't strong enough to learn life's lessons. She claimed that she, Yo-Yo, had come into Anya's life for a reason, and that the breakdown was simply proof that Anya wasn't capable of learning what she needed to. Which, if she's going to take that approach, the lesson was probably to tie Yo-Yo to a string and throw her off a cliff to see if her name actually had any legitimate meaning. But seriously, I'd already seen her logic in small ways before I quit, because where we were, winters were pretty brutal, still brutal, well below zero. And I have Raynaud's syndrome, and it means, if you guys have got it, it means your hands turn blue and throb with pain, and, when it's not even that cold. And sometimes when I got into work, I'd have to, had my hands under actually cold water, not warm water, for about 10 minutes and warming them before I could even hold a pen. But Yo-Yo insisted that when her hands were cold, she would focus all of her energy and channel blood to them. And she claimed that it always worked for her, even in sub-zero temperatures, without gloves. And therefore, it should work for anyone. And if it didn't work for me, it wasn't the cold, it was me and my failure. She literally said that. As I said, I quit that job. Anyway, that logic, that reframing of suffering as personal fault, it spread like wildfire, at least in Germany. I notice it here a lot. I mean, you don't need many excuses to stop showing empathy in Germany, it would seem. Anyway, back to Anya. When she was looking for support, she confided in a woman who had replaced me, who professed to be spiritually awakened as well. So instead of listening, that woman just offered one of those high rotation platitudes of the spiritually smug. You just need to learn how to forgive. And that was it. No listening ear, no tell me what happened, no real conversation that could have built trust or friendship or helped Anya. Anya ended up in the psychiatric ward. And that platitude giver, she walked away feeling smug, like she had helped. And that is what this belief system does. If you've read 1984, you'll remember Newspeak, the way language gets twisted until words mean almost the opposite of what they should. Like, when George W. Bush did the freedom thing to describe sending troops to invade Afghanistan, when freedom came to mean war. Western spiritualism does the same thing with empathy. It relabels cruelty as teaching. It reframes suffering as a personal flaw, a weakness, a failure, low vibration. And it gives people like Yo-Yo a way to hurt others and tell the world they helped. It forces victims to believe that care is hurt and that their longing for real connection is just proof that they're broken or not enough. And at scale, this is what's happening to all of us. Western spiritualism promises connection whilst delivering performance. It tells us to care, but only in a way that fits a brand, a feed, or a workshop agenda. And it tells us to be authentic only for the sake of sales, likes, views, and sponsors. Empathy and authenticity become selling points in name. And in practice, just a way to write off anyone who attracts bad things into their life. The kind of empathy that builds friendships, deepen bonds, makes you feel known. It can't exist in this setup. There's no space for messy, reciprocal listening, the kind that actually heals. Instead, there's a conveyor belt of platitudes, each one delivered with a smile, each one reinforcing the same message. If you're in pain, it's your fault. We're told once again that we're failing because we're not following the formula right. So why doesn't it work? Why, after all the affirmations and manifesting journals and energy cleansing kits, do we still feel off? Because it was never designed to work. This is the narcissistic cycle. And Sam Vaknin, for all his controversy, nails the pattern. He says covert narcissism isn't about satisfaction. It's about sustaining longing. The moment the longing ends, the illusion collapses. Game over. And society, our covert narcissistic parent, mirrors that same game. It doesn't want wholeness. It wants almost whole, almost healed, almost happy, almost enough, because almost can be sold to. The system transforms your longing into market data and your ache into a business model. It feeds you a steady diet of shame and promise that if you just align harder, think brighter, detach more thoroughly, you'll finally arrive. And yet you never do. Hegel's master-slave dialectic helps us see this trap. The master only has power because the slave affirms it. Likewise, spiritual capitalism only works because we keep feeding it with our hope, our hurt, our money, our longing. And unlike Hegel's version, which ends in possible mutual recognition, growth, capitalist narcissism wants no synthesis. It thrives on churning. You go from feeling broken to feeling like one who can fix themselves back to broken again. And Nietzsche foresaw that too. When he said God is dead, he warned us, if we don't create new meaning, false gods will rise. Western spiritualism, in its modern marketable form, is one of them. It puts the God complex in our hands. It puts us in the God seat. It tells you you are the divine creator now, and then blames you when it falls apart. This is a loop with no end. It's a freedom that isolates, a self-mastery that feels more like solitary confinement. And the bonus prize, for no extra cost, it leaves us lonelier than ever. Because when empathy is systematically stripped away in the name of self-empowerment, connection becomes impossible. And what replaces it? Scorn, blame, and dismissal. Those still hoping for more, for care, for real human contact. We're all left believing we're broken, simply for wanting what is a basic human need. And those who did the breaking, they float off into some self-inflated world where they are the god and everyone else is just there to echo back, "You're amazing." It's a narcissistic stupor, one that pretends to transcend the ugliness of Western values, but only ends up amplifying them. In a nutshell, Western spiritualism promises freedom, but it only hands you a shinier version of Western capitalism, the same cage. We started with Nietzsche, who told us that God is dead and left us staring into the void. That void, that the aching God-shaped hole, became a marketplace. Capitalism saw our longing for meaning, connection, and protection and turned it into a sales opportunity. Then we traced how longing collided with the values Western culture already held dear: control, individualism, the hero narrative. And instead of dismantling those values, we doubled down. And what emerged wasn't mysticism, it was marketing. Spiritualism became capitalism's body double, promising that we could manifest, align, and think our way into being the gods of our own lives. And as a side effect, manifesting everybody else into props, obstacles, or nice reflections. The catch was always there. The narcissistic cycle never lets you arrive. Like Sam Vaknin points out, longing is the point. You are meant to stay almost healed, almost whole, just aligned enough to keep buying, but never enough to stop. Hegel's master-slave dialectic showed us the deeper structure. The gurus, the coaches, the masters only have power because we hand it to them. Without our worship, they're just people with crystals and ring lights and tragic backstories. And the moment they ascend, they actually become slaves anyway. Slaves to our attention, our belief, our money. It's not transcendence. It's that churning thing. And what happens inside that churn? Empathy dies and takes connection with it. Because when every struggle is a lesson and every pain is manifested, nobody has to care anymore. You can just hand someone a platitude and feel righteous for it. You don't have to listen. You don't have to connect. You can just get on with your own God-hero narrative in which you are the superstar. And this is the quiet horror of this system. It doesn't just repackage narcissistic values, it amplifies them. It turns control into a spiritual mandate. It turns individualism into divine law, and it turns grandiosity into salvation, whilst turning our suffering into personal failure. And here's the link back to why this belongs in the loneliness industry, because every time empathy dies, connection dies too. Western spiritualism doesn't teach us how to sit with each other in grief or joy, or how to listen to each other and be present. It teaches us to see every other person as a mirror, a lesson, a test, a prop in our own hero's journey. And when you live in that frame, you don't build friendships, you don't build community, you curate an audience. So if you're going to this system for connection, it can't give it to you. It can only sell you more of what made you lonely in the first place. More control, more self-surveillance, more pressure to be your own God, and more blame when that God fails. This isn't spiritual healing. This is narcissism with a rose quartz up its arse. A prettier, yet far more insincere, love and light version of the same values that left us empty, all dressed up as enlightenment. And with that, thank you for listening. I do have one more thing to say, and it is an extra special thanks to someone who is incredibly generous and bailed me out of a very difficult hole, which was the breakdown of my laptop. I actually don't think I would have been able to replace said laptop on my own for many, many months. So if you enjoy this podcast, you have this person to thank. I'm not going to name them because they asked not to be named, but a very generous person who obviously also treasures the podcast. Thank you. Thank you so much. You know who you are. And yeah, I can't thank you enough. May you have a wonderful day, everyone. And I'm not going to say go in love and light. I'm going to say go in connection with those who you care about. Till then, bye.